Welcome back to Briggs on Books. You know, we have been broadcasting from Central California as a regional show for 8 years, and COVID wiped us out, made us change everything and how we do it. But on the other end of COVID, we learned this new Zoom technology that everybody's using. Now we're interviewing authors from all over the world, and today our third or fourth author coming up. Stick around for this. He'll be here in a minute. Ivan Jenson is his name. He's not just an author, he's a fine artist, a novelist, popular contemporary poet. He lives in Grand Rapids, Michigan right now. By the way, his art is featured in Art in America, Art News, Interview Magazine, and is sold at Christie's. Can you imagine? We're going to have him here. Amongst his commissions are the final portrait of the late Malcolm Forbes and a painting titled Absolute Jenson. Has something to do with Absolute Vodka, if you know what I mean. But I guess they're using his in some of their ads. His pictures hang in the Spirit Museum, the Museum of Spirits in Stockholm, Sweden. All these crazy, exciting things that he's done. His novels, Dead Artist and Scenes, Soraya, illustrate the creative, often dramatic lives of artists. His poetry is widely published, over 1,000 poems published in the U.S. and the U.K. and Europe, and a variety of literary media. Anyway, he started this very young, and he's got an exciting life, and we're going to bring him on in a minute, and we're going to kind of drag him through all these years of things he did, from the beautiful art to the poetry to the novel. By the way, now he's got another novel out. He's the #1 best-selling poet on Amazon. Is one of his books. But his new book is East of Ivan, a memoir that kind of lays out this journey. Let's bring in our guest, Ivan Jenson. Welcome, and thank you for coming on our show. What an exciting guy you are.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I don't know where to start. Well, first of all, let's do the book just a little bit. I want to go and talk about the art, then we'll come back to the book and dig in a little more. The book, is it out already?
Yes, it's a memoir. It spans like 30 years from childhood till I was 30, all the exciting parts. And it's been out for about a month. It's a sweeping saga.
Now, our viewers are seeing the cover. That's your art as well, correct? That looks kind of Picasso-esque?
Yes, I have the Picasso influence. I was obsessed with Pablo Picasso when I was a teenager. I mean, I would constantly be going to this library, and I would take out books of Picasso. I love late Picasso especially. So it's an influence of mine for sure.
That is awesome. Now, this memoir lays out this long life of yours. You started where? L.A.?
It starts in L.A., and that's where I grew up, the youngest of six, in a quirky, alternative family where art was the higher power. So if you were painting, or in my case, painting, you could make a mess. If you wanted to listen to a Bob Dylan album, it's okay if you scratched the record as long as you were listening to quality stuff. So I wanted attention. And so the way that I did it was by being extremely funny. And I taught myself to draw at the age of 7 by copying Michelangelo.
Right. I don't know. Let's go through some of the art. Let's go to slide B there. This is you at 22, by the way, Ivan. And this is the painting Man of the 80s. And it's at the Palladium nightclub in New York City.
Yeah, the craziest thing was it was very trendy to be showing in nightclubs. All Francisco Clemente, Keith Haring, Andy Warhol, they all showed in nightclubs. So I had an opportunity. Actually, it was my mother. She was working for Varda Chocolates, and they needed something behind a sushi bar, and they needed a 10-foot painting. So instantly, I made the painting in one night. I'd never made a painting that large. In fact, I called my mother that night, and I said, I can't do it. She said, just use larger brushes. So I made it in one night, and then what happened was they had the East Village Collective presented by the Whitney Museum, and suddenly my painting was there at the top of the Palladium, featured in a Whitney Centennial. So it all happened overnight. It was crazy.
Let's go to the next one, this portrait of Malcolm Forbes.
Yeah, I met Malcolm Forbes. I went with my friend on a motorcycle to a bar on 12th Street, Lucky's, and it was my lucky day. And I saw Malcolm Forbes with Phyllis Diller. and no one was talking to them. So I went up to them and I said, well, you only live once. And I always had my photos of my art. This was before cell phones. I always had photos of my art on me. So I showed Phyllis Diller and Malcolm Forbes my art, and he said, well, you're better than Picasso. Then I grabbed a model. There was an elite model there, and she had a T-shirt on, and I drew with my markers. I always carried a fat black pilot marker with me, and I drew a drawing of a face on the back, and he was very impressed. Anyway, to make a long story short, he invited me on the Highlander yacht to draw all the billionaires and millionaires. And then he commissioned me to paint his portrait, and it became the last commissioned portrait of Malcolm Forbes, which they have in their collection.
It's beautiful, by the way. But just the whole story. Oh, Malcolm Forbes sitting there with Phyllis Diller, right?
No one was talking to them, so I seized the moment.
I did get to know his son, Steve Forbes, a bit. He's still around. Now, this next...
Yeah, I met him.
And
I bet if we would all go on the yacht, and then we would stop at West Point and watch a football game, then get back on the yacht and cruise back to the Hudson.
Yeah. I don't know if I mentioned in your earlier introduction, you're a rock and roller as well. We have a picture of your band playing in front of, your band is True Art, playing at the Limelight, and behind you is your large painting, Women of the 80s. Where's the Limelight?
The Limelight was on, I believe, 20th Street and 6th Avenue, and it was a church that was turned into a nightclub. It was very famous. So I had my big premiere party event solo exhibit there, and I had a show. And I was crazy back then. I write about it in the memoir. I hired, studio musicians to play behind me. I paid for $1,000 sound system, which I didn't need to do. They had a perfectly good sound system. I had a sound system ready for, Yankee Stadium. And I performed that night. And my rock dreams I did, but it was my art that really took off for me.
Now, this book, East of Ivan, is not your first. In fact, we have a picture of you here when you're about 17 years old, writing a novel in New Rochelle, New York. Is that your first novel?
Well, I wrote my first novel, believe it or not, when I was, 13 going on 14. My parents sent me to Costa Rica and to sculpt. And so I had so many misadventures there, and I would write home handwritten letters to my mother, and she said, these are so, have such style. Why don't you write a novel like this? So I wrote a novel called Walking Wounded when I was 14, and my father, disguised as Robert Bruno, he was my literary agent in disguise, submitted it to top publishers, and Delacorte Press called it Catcher in the Rye ×9. So that novel, though a couple more places I'm sure it would have been published, but it was Toni Morrison read it, Gordon Lish, but I always remembered that, and I came back to it now with a fury, my novel writing and my writing in general.
And I keep alluding to you keep alluding to these other side stories, which could be a whole interview in itself. Your parents shipped you off to Costa Rica. We can't talk about that now, but this next picture is a large-scale portrait of Van Gogh. This is my favorite of yours that I've seen.
That's a current painting. So that was done within the last couple of years. That's a large scale painting, 5 foot by 6. And one of my fortes is I paint my version of Van Gogh in my style, in my pop art style. So, it's dynamic. I've painted dozens and dozens of paintings of Van Gogh in my style. It's just something that I do. One day I'd like to have an exhibit of all Van Goghs.
Now let's look at this last one, you actually painting in a New York gallery. Again, I'm recognizing your style now.
Yeah, there it is, arriving at a top gallery in Chelsea, and the gallerist is there looking it over, and that's my forte. I really prefer painting large scale, and faces is kind of my theme, because it makes, if you do a larger than life-size face, it just becomes like a giant, like a monument.
Are any of your paintings in galleries in New York right now?
That one, yeah. I mean, my paintings are everywhere. They crop up on, auctions all the time, and they're so. I've sold hundreds and hundreds of paintings, so they're everywhere. They're in galleries throughout the world. Sometimes I'll see that there's a gallery in Zurich that has a work of mine. I never know. I can't keep track.
I go to New York a lot. Next time I go, I'll email you and say, hey, where can I see a couple of your paintings in New York? So that'll be fun. Now,
for sure.
What a story you're telling. Malcolm Forbes, Phyllis Diller, shipped off to Costa Rica. Is that the kind of stuff that's included in your memoir?
Yeah, I wrote this memoir in a fury about 5 years ago, and what it is you see a quirky child that wants to get noticed. Okay, I'm a Leo and all that stuff. So then the rock and roll fantasy, and that kind of, those are all misadventures. Everything in rock and roll that could go wrong went wrong. It was still a lot of fun. Then what happens is there's a breakthrough when I turn 21. I see a therapist, and the therapist is, "What's wrong?" I said, "I'm still living at home. I got to figure out a career." After that one therapy session, I went on the street with clothing line, some clothespins, and some quickly drawn works on paper. I just put them up with clothespins and stood there in Times Square, and I was like, maybe this will work. Instantly, New Yorkers started to buy my art. So right away, the first day, I made $150. So I quit my job at a catering company, instantly became professional. And within a year, I was having shows, nightclub shows. It was nonstop after that. It was like overnight New York City success. Cool. It was really a phenomenon. And so I capture that. I take you on a long journey of someone that wants something to happen, and then boom, you get the release of it happening, and then the reality of what a vaudeville show it was that I experienced. My art career was not the norm. It was very unusual and offbeat, and very downtown.
What decade were you a kid? 60s, 70s, 80s?
I was in the 60s, yeah. So in the 60s, I was, born 62. So 60s going in the 70s. And so what happened is, when I did the art world scene, I hit it right at the 80s, and there was an art boom in the East Village, especially then. So it was as trendy to be an artist as to be a rock star then. I caught the wave. In fact, if I would just started a little earlier, I would have caught even more of the wave, but I caught the crest of the wave. And I was just thrust into a situation where, entire champagne events were thrown around me. And the funniest things, I always wanted to grow up to throw parties, because when I was a kid, my family threw lavish parties, which I write about. And so in my 20s, I got the opportunity to throw lavish parties and have a blast. It was just crazy.
Tell us about your childhood with your parents. Were they eccentric, eclectic, enlightened? How would you describe them?
Well, my mother was very into music, and she encouraged us. And my father was a writer; he wrote for Mankind magazine, and I think that they became, mentors to us. And so it was a musical family. My sister was a classical violinist; is a classical violinist, and it was mostly musical. I was started on the cello, etc. But I just navigated towards quite a few things. But the visual arts was something that I trained myself early on. So when I was 9, we were in Costa Rica. My sister was having a concert. She was a prodigy. And I fell in a fountain, and I got soaked. And they said, this guy's too hyperactive. We need to put him somewhere. So they put me in a sculpture class just to get me out of their hair. And I made a sculpture within 2 hours that impressed them so much and the school that I ended up staying longer in Costa Rica. And that sculpture that I made when I was 9 was used as the poster for the national exhibit. So I started young, but the key was there was so much going on that for me, I needed to cut through. But they were 100% encouraging. I remember when my mother said, one day you could become a great poet. And ironically, only now is when it really took off with my poetry, when I took up writing again here in Grand Rapids. So they really gave us a lot of confidence.
Did you learn Spanish?
Not much, but if I'm thrown into it, I learn it pretty quick. My mother was Costa Rican.
Wow. So. Oh, I got to get this memoir. This is crazy. This is too many wonderful things happen to one guy. I got to read about this journey.
It's 500 pages long. It's for someone that wants to just dive into a vivid, sweeping, Lawrence of Arabia, quirky, dysfunctional
Hold that up
family.
one more time. That looks like a large book.
Yeah, I can't believe it. I mean, it would take me a long time to read the book. I can't believe I wrote it. I just knew that I had to. I wrote a book called Gypsies of New Rochelle that was a fictional take on my family with magical realism. And my sister said, why don't you write the real thing? And I knew I had to do it because it was just too crazy a story. There were too many wild stories. And so what I did is that I realized from doing this is that even though I've been through some, disappointments and triumphs, it was worth it because it reads like my life reads like an entertaining novel. You'll find it really entertaining. So I was like, well, to go through that, at least I got this memoir out of it.
And it's not made up. That's what's crazy.
Yeah, it's the highlights. They all came to me, because by then I'd been reading many novels and I've been reading tons of novels. And so it reads like a novel. And I picked up only the the stuff that you really want to, the grist for the mill, you know.
Now, we're way past time. I could talk to you for hours, Ivan, but let me ask you this. If somebody goes to ivanjohnson.com, what are they going to find there?
Well, ivanjenson.com,
Sorry.
Jen, yeah, Jenson. That's my website, so they'll see some of my
It's
art,
on the screen
introduction
there, yeah.
to me. Yeah, ivanjenson.com, that's my website. But if they want to get the novel or the memoir, just go to Amazon and put Ivan Jenson, and it'll come
I
up.
did that, by the way.
It hit number 5 on Amazon.
By the way, you're the only Ivan Jenson on Amazon, so it's pretty easy to find.
Yep.
And of course, we found you at Ivan Jenson on Instagram, so you got a lot of interesting stuff there too. So,
Yeah, that's where I post, you know, when I'm selling paintings and this and that.
well, you're
you know.
absolutely one of the most exciting guests we've ever had, Ivan. Anything else you want to tell our
Thank you.
viewers before we're out of time?
Well, I've got more novels in store with my publisher, and they're putting out four more novels and any other novel that I might want to produce. So there's one coming out called The Tigress, and that's a psychological thriller, and they're very female. I write these female-centric psychological thrillers about faulted heroines that get into trouble in suburbia, since I'm living in suburbia. But I encourage everybody to go get East of Ivan on Amazon, and you know, maybe Hollywood will call.
It does sound like a movie, doesn't it? Your real life.
I did have a company that wanted to sell this to the rights to be a scripted series. I don't know what happened to them, but that showed me that there's potential for that. But for sure,
Well,
your words to God's ears.
well, anybody like me who grew up the same time period, 60s, 70s, 80s, you had a real live journey that a lot of people try to take that journey, and you ended up taking it. So congratulations on the book. And as soon as I read the book, maybe we'll have you back on and talk about it some more, if that's okay.
Oh, great. I really appreciate it, Mike.
Ivan Jenson, all the information on the screen, there's his email address, his web address, his Instagram address, and East of Ivan is the book. We'll be back with more Briggs on Books right after this.